And what if I told you Metallica's biggest betrayal didn't happen on stage, but in the mixing room? Jason Newsted gave them everything: riffs, loyalty, silence. And in return, they gave him 14 years of hazing, shut doors, and one infamous record where his bass was literally turned down to zero. Not symbolically, physically. They muted him, on purpose. From day one, he wasn't a bandmate. He was a placeholder, a new kid filling some big shoes. And when he finally tried to create something of his own, James Hetfield shut it down cold. Not because it was bad, but because it was Jason. Here's how Metallica made Jason Newsted vanish while the whole world was watching.
Like, subscribe, thank you.
And Jason Newsted got the Metallica call in late 1986. Cliff Burton was gone, killed in a bus crash that September, and the band did not waste any time. They held auditions fast, picked Newsted, and had him on stage in Japan in less than 5 weeks later. He left Flotsam and Jetsam, a speed metal outfit out of Phoenix, thinking that he was stepping into something permanent. But for the first 5.5 months, he wasn't even considered a full member. No real say or cut of the money, just the new guy filling in. However, that all changed in 1987. Newsted finally got his official status as a band member and a full share. His first proper recording with the band wasn't a full album. It was the $5.98 EP, Garage Days Revisited. Pretty smoking album, just covers, but it marked the beginning of his real tenure. One that would lead straight into And Justice for All and the quiet erasure of his bass from that record. From day one, Jason Newsted walked into a band that had not healed. Cliff Burton was gone and nobody had dealt with it. James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, Kirk Hammett were all in their mid-20s, raw with grief and pissed off at the world. And they pretty much threw that weight on the new guy that came in. They hazed him constantly, trashed his hotel rooms, dumped bar tabs on his bill. And it wasn't just pranks, it was emotional bleed out. Hetfield would later admit it, that they basically grieved through Jason, made him the outlet, the replacement, the problem. Newsted showed up trying to earn his place, but the door was already closed. No matter how hard he worked, he was the new guy. The tag never left. Even after he was made a full member, and after the tours and records and all the years, he was still the stand-in for somebody they lost. A reminder, not a brother. Well, the joke stopped being funny and the rejection got strategic. Once the pranks wore off, Jason Newsted found himself iced out of the writing room. 14 years in Metallica, 3 songwriting credits, and that's it. He brought riffs, brought songs. Most of them never even got a second look. And according to the fans and some insiders, Newsted's ideas weren't just decent. They're a lot better than what ended up on Load or Reload. He gave him that opening riff for Blackened his first year in. That one made it. But after that, the door pretty much slammed shut again. Meanwhile, tracks like Attitude made the cut. Mediocre filler that somehow beat out the bassist vault of unused ideas. The message was clear. Thanks to the bass lines, stay the hell out of the spotlight. Flemming Rasmussen, who co-produced And Justice for All, said it outright. Newsted never got the respect that he deserved. He played the shows, stuck it out, but inside the group, it was still James and Lars calling every shot. They wrote the songs, made the decisions. Jason was basically along for the ride, not behind the wheel, not even in the passenger seat. And Lars later admitted it. There's no illusion of democracy. Jason did not have a voice or a vote. He was a hired gun with a membership card. Basically a placeholder for something lost, never really invited into the core. And after years of silence, that weight started really cracking him. And one thing that Lars said that really stuck out was that it was just insane that he actually stayed as long as he did. The band gave him almost nothing back, and yet he still showed up. And the fans saw it too. Many people calling them basically human dirtbags spoiled by fame and alcohol. And it really would take Jason walking out on them for reality to finally land. Some Kind of Monster actually backed that up. Newsted's exit wasn't a goodbye, it was basically a mirror. One that they had spent years refusing to look into. So Justice for All dropped in '88, with it Jason Newsted's bass disappearing into the void. We hear this mid-scooped mix. Fans heard drums, guitars, vocals, everything but the bass. The mix was so bone dry on the low end it became a running joke, then a controversy, then a defining scar on the record. Full disclosure, I personally really like that mix, but there's a lot of people that will argue with me on that. Go right ahead in the comment section, I do appreciate it. Some people argue about why it happened. Some say it was a calculated hazing ritual, this brutal passive-aggressive way to test the new kid, see if he could just stand there and take it without flinching. But other accounts say it wasn't a prank, that it was disrespect, plain and simple. He was too new, too shut out, too unimportant in the eyes of James and Lars to really fight for in the mix. But most likely, knowing that Metallica really was out there to sort of make a statement after losing Cliff, that they were just being short-sighted. Lars would obsess over that mix, and the way everything was equalized, they wanted to find some way to get those guitars to cut through and the drums to cut through, and it was basically just a big ego war between James and Lars, and so of course the bass got pushed to the side as a result. That's more of the plausible argument. But Newsted tracked his bass in a single day with Fleming, and after that it was out of his hands. Lars and James took the reins, no reworking of his lines, they just ended up buried. And Newsted never forgot that, and neither did the fans. And Hetfield gave his own version, and that kind of ties in a little bit with what I said in terms of saying that it was the frequencies. According to him, Newsted was doubling his rhythm parts very closely, playing so tight with the guitars that the sounds were kind of blurred. And when they tried to mix it, the bass lines just got lost in the wall of distortion. No separation of clarity, just pure mud. So that bass just kept getting pulled down further and further and further. Hetfield framed it as more of a technical decision, not a personal one. The critics pointed out, though, that if the bass doubled the guitar, it still adds punch, fills that bottom end. To a lot of people, stripping that out left the record sounding brittle and hollow. And it would also be hard to believe that James and Lars would actually sabotage their own record just to haze somebody. It just doesn't add up. Nevertheless, Metallica really swung for the fences with that mix, and a lot of people were not on board with it. And Fleming saw it unfold in real time. He was in the room. He had heard Jason's bass parts and called them friggin' brilliant. And then he watched as Lars and James would tell the engineers to keep dialing down that bass more and more. And it actually confused Fleming, according to him. It made no sense. Newsted had delivered. The playing was definitely tight and aggressive. You could hear that in the Guitar Hero customs of it that came out, if you could get your hands on them. And it's true, the bass sounded pretty friggin' tight. But it didn't matter. He was still the new kid. The band treated him like it. But the thing about it was, on Garage Days Revisited, Newsted's bass was front and center. Fat, loud, driving, it anchored the whole thing. Same player, same studio, different treatment. And when the album finally hit the speakers and those playbacks, Jason Newsted was pissed. He put in all that work, tracking his bass alone with the producer, playing clean and tight exactly what was asked, and that buried bass just completely rattled him, totally shaking his confidence. He thought he had nailed it, but it was just gutted. But years later, Newsted would reflect back on it with more of a surgical view, saying maybe if he had known more about the frequencies at the time, he could have avoided clashing with Hetfield's tone. He admitted he was chasing speed, doubling guitar riffs instead of carving out kind of his own sonic lane, and that kind of aligned with Hetfield's story, that you had basically just this constructive interference going on so much in the low end that something had to give, and those guitars, of course, really carry Metallica's sound. But it was water under the bridge. And something else that Jason had pointed out was something that a lot of fans missed, is that the sidelining of the bass actually wasn't new. Hetfield and Ulrich had been doing it since day one. Like on the No Life to Leather demo, Lars' own handwriting on the cassette said, "Turn bass down on stereo." So that was their blueprint long before Newsted showed up. The Justice mix just kind of solidified everything. But by 2001, the dam had finally broke. Newsted walked. Officially blamed it on physical damage and personal reasons. But off the record, it was everything. Years of creative suffocation, emotional burnout, and a band that really never let him all the way in. He quit just as his Saint Anger era was beginning to spiral, ducking out before the full meltdown took shape. His exit wasn't loud, just final, and maybe overdue. But the real fracture really came down to Echobrain. Newsted wanted room to breathe. He spent years as a background figure, shut out of the songwriting process. And so when Echobrain came along, it was a chance to really finally create something on his own terms. Clean slate, no gatekeepers. But Hetfield was not having any of it. He saw Echobrain as a total threat. This happened with Newsted's earlier side project with Devin Townsend called IR. Back in '94, James and Lars slammed the brakes on that one. Told him he couldn't just record music outside of the band and send it out without clearing it through them. Jason didn't even realize he had stepped on a political landmine. He broke down, apologized, swore it would never happen again. And by the time Echobrain came around, he wasn't apologizing anymore. Q Prime, Metallica's own management, heard the demos and wanted in. They thought that band actually had legs, and also thought that Jason Newsted's name could give it a bit of weight. But that's when the walls really closed in. Hetfield made it clear. Being in Metallica meant everything else stopped. Newsted had been spending 14 years of being sidelined, and now they wanted to block the one thing that actually gave him creative freedom. So he left. No drama or blow up. Echobrain was his future, and Metallica wasn't. But the thing about it is, I mean, Newsted was so excited about this thing, even bankrolled the sessions, lined up some serious backing. But Hetfield just totally put the kibosh on it. And then Q Prime backed out. Call stopped, no more backing. Newsted was basically left holding the bag he had poured the money into, taking creative and financial risks and got nothing back. Not because the music wasn't good or because the project failed, but because it was his. And that apparently was the problem. The thing about it was Jason just couldn't believe that this small personal project was even seen as a danger to the beast that was Metallica. And Some Kind of Monster picked up right after Newsted left. He's in the film looking back with zero regret, just disbelief. Disbelief that a band that size needed a group therapist to hold itself together. He called it really freaking lame and weak. He'd seen enough, and he was done. So when Newsted walked out of Metallica in 2001, it rattled the foundation. Nobody had ever done that before. That theoretically should have been by James and Lars's decision, not by somebody else's. And so therefore, that actually made a stat that was stuck in their heads. And they hated that stat. It was like, what the hell are you doing? You can't do that. You can only leave if we want you to leave. That was the mindset. But they weren't ready to ask why, weren't capable of unpacking what had built up over 14 years. The hazing, the buried bass, the songwriting lockout, Echobrain shutdown, to mention a few. It just all stacked up, and Jason was just done. You know, really it just came down to the fact that Jason just needed a creative outlet. And even that, they just headed him off at the pass. And Lars would later admit that nobody in Metallica could say back then that Jason Newsted was the sacrifice, the sacrificial lamb for the band's cleanup, emotional reckoning, and creative shift. Kind of forced them to look at themselves a bit. And in the end, they were able to have a fairly decent relationship anyways. Jason stayed close, played with them at their 30th anniversary shows, showed up for the Black Album box set unboxing, still texts with Lars. Ulrich has nothing but praise now for him. Jason Newsted was never really given a real seat at the table, but when he finally stood up and walked away, it changed the band forever. Leave a comment. I want to hear what you have to say about this one. To my subscribers, thank you. You are freaking awesome. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe, reach out, grab that subscribe button, kick it out of your band, then reach over and file a copy claim against the like button, join the family, and I want to thank you so much for watching.